Hello, I love Super Nintendo. I eat, sleep and live everything SNES. I love Super Nintendo. Capcom. Love 'em or hate 'em, you can't deny the massive influence this video gaming company has had on the sport that we all know and love. Creating such hugely popular game series as Resident Evil, Mega Man, Devil May Cry and of course Street Fighter, Capcom has gone from strength to strength from 1983 and still continues to be one of the leading companies in video game production. However, it has not all been fairy tales and bunny hopping for Capcom. Recently, the company has been criticised by players and other computer companies alike for their questionable tactics in making a quick buck. The most recent controversy is over the game Street Fighter Cross Tekken, where players were furious to find out that the downloadable content, which they were being asked to pay more for, was already written onto the game's disc, so you were having to pay more to unlock a disc you'd already paid for anyway. Other questionable tactics used by Capcom has been their reimagining of games that are just out anyway. What they would do is they would re-release a game with minor improvements far too quickly just to make a few more quid. One of the first ones that comes to mind is the game Street Fighter II Turbo. Released on the SNES in 1993, only 1 year after the original Street Fighter II game, Turbo boasts a wealth of new features. The game plays faster and fairer. There are more playable characters on offer, and each character is better balanced to create a more enjoyable gaming experience. However, surely being released only 1 year after the original means that not an awful lot could have improved, could it? Street Fighter II Turbo is, for all intents and purposes, the same game that graced our gaming screens a year earlier. The graphics are slightly altered, but nothing major. Many of the moves are unchanged, and the sound effects, aside from a few more voiceovers, are what we first encountered with Street Fighter II in 1992. However, it is where the game has changed, which is what is particularly important. First of all, each of the characters appears to have been better balanced alongside one another, and most of the original selectable characters have been given extra moves to give the player better chance against the 4 boss characters. One of the biggest difficulties with the original was that later on in the game the computer-controlled characters started using underhand tactics such as mobbing of the same move and countering a move before you had made it. With Turbo, the game still feels unfair at times, but it's generally a lot more manageable than previously. Secondly, there are 4 more playable characters to choose from in Street Fighter II Turbo. Each of these new playable characters were in the original, but only as secret bosses towards the end of the game, and could not be selected. In Turbo, you now have the option to select Balrog, Vega, Sagat or Bison. However, the most important improvement in Street Fighter Turbo, and the reason the game gets its name, is for Turbo mode. At the beginning of the game, you can choose to play in normal mode or Turbo mode up to 4 stars Turbo. This dramatically increases gameplay speed and allows characters to attack and counteract at a far quicker pace. Now, unless you've played the original and the Turbo games side by side, you cannot appreciate what an incredibly important move this really was. Street Fighter II was a great game, but at times the characters' animations were so slow. When jumping through the air in particular, the characters acted more like they were on the moon as they floated down, allowing an opponent ample time to read the situation and react accordingly. With Turbo mode enabled, I am glad to say that the gameplay improves massively. My only major concern with Street Fighter II Turbo is why did we have to wait for a second game before finally receiving the Street Fighter game that we deserved? All of the additions in this game don't feel like additions at all. They feel like they should have been there right from the start. So why weren't they there right from the start? There is no major reason why none of these things, the extra characters, the faster speed, could not have been included in Street Fighter 2. So why do we have to have a second game to basically fix the problems from the first game? They shouldn't have existed in the first place. The only other problem I have with this game is that you can now play, two people can play as the same character. The game now offers two players a chance to fight each other using the same character. In versus mode, this is a nice touch, but the one-player game is ridiculous. It makes no sense why I would be fighting an exact clone of myself. When I was a kid, and Turbo was the only Street Fighter game I owned, I thought it was pretty stupid. But now that I've played the original, and know that it was a new feature to this game, I find it even less acceptable. Street Fighter 2 Turbo single-handedly makes the original game superfluous. Turbo is, at its base, exactly the same game as the original, but with a few improvements. Well, I'm sorry, but those improvements shouldn't have needed to have been made. The original game should not have had the problems it did have, meaning that this game never would have had to have existed. If the original game played fast enough to begin with, we wouldn't need Turbo mode. If you were allowed to play as the secret bosses to begin with, we wouldn't need Turbo game, would we? The inclusion of the 4 boss characters don't feel like an add-on, but more they feel like they should have been included right from the start. The Turbo option doesn't feel extra fast. It feels like the speed that the game should have been played at. Generally, this game was the game that the original SNES game should have been. At the end of the day, Capcom is a business, and the object of any business is to make money. It might seem devious or underhanded to you or me, but at the end of the day, Capcom are re-releasing games with minor improvements and people are buying them. If video gamers weren't buying the re-released games, then Capcom would have given up this idea long ago. But they know that they can release a Turbo edition of a game, or a Super edition of a game, or a Hyper or an Ultra edition of a game with few improvements, and people will buy it. There is a market there. If Capcom should be blamed for anything, it should not be their re-releasing of games. It should be for allowing the following footage to exist, because in my mind, this next bit is criminal.
You came from across the world to fight me, soldier.
Stand clear.
Now is your chance.
Nations relief workers kidnapped 24 hours ago by shadows.
Pathetic.
Yes, it is, isn't it? If Street Fighter 2 Turbo had been the last Street Fighter game on the SNES, then fans would have been happy generally. It fixed all the glitches and problems from the original game and generally made Street Fighter a lot more fun and fair. However, despite this, Capcom decided that improvements were needed, and so, less than a year later, a new game was released on the Super Nintendo, Super Street Fighter 2. Did it fix any problems? Was it necessary? Or was it just one step too far? Join us next time when we'll find out.